Everyone told her the thing she had found was impossible. She was sitting at a drafting table in a room with no window onto the sea, and she had just discovered the largest single feature on the face of the earth, a mountain range longer than anything on land, longer than the Andes, the Rockies, and the Himalayas combined. And almost no one would look at it, because the person who found it was a woman, and the year was 1952. This is the story of Marie Tharp, the woman who mapped the bottom of the ocean and was told that her greatest discovery was just girl talk. To understand how strange her story is, you have to understand what people believed about the ocean floor back then. They believed it was nothing. A flat plain of mud, featureless. The dead bottom of the sea, the same from one side of the Atlantic to the other. For thousands of years, no one had any real idea what was down there. It was the least explored place on the planet, farther from us, in a way, than the surface of the moon. And Marie Tharp was about to draw it, line, by hand. She had come to New York in 1948 looking for work. She had degrees in geology and in mathematics, at a time when women were quietly told that science was not for them. She walked into Columbia University, and the man in charge looked at her and asked one question. Can you draft? That was the job they had for her. Not to think, not to theorize, to sit at a table and turn other people's numbers into neat, clean lines. So that is where they put her. Here's the part that should make you angry. The data she was drawing came from ships, research vessels that sailed out across the Atlantic, dragging an instrument that pinged the seabed and measured how deep it was, over and over, all the way across the ocean. Marie was not allowed on those ships because she was a woman, and there was an old superstition among sailors that a woman on board was bad luck. So the men went to sea. They had the adventure. They collected the numbers. And Marie stayed behind in the office and did the thing that actually mattered. She took those endless columns of depth readings and turned them into a picture of a world no human eye had ever seen. She worked for years, profile after profile, each one a single slice across the ocean, showing the shape of the bottom rising and falling. And then, in 1952, she noticed something. In the very middle of the Atlantic, in every profile she drew, there was a notch, a deep V-shaped valley running right down the center of an underwater mountain range. In line after line, in the same place, the same split. A rift, a crack in the floor of the world. And Marie understood what it might mean. If the seafloor was cracked open down the middle, then maybe something was pushing it apart from below. Maybe the ground itself was moving. Maybe the continents were not fixed at all, but drifting, slowly, across the face of the planet. This idea had a name. Continental drift. A German scientist named Alfred Wegener had proposed it decades earlier, and been laughed out of the room for it. In 1952, believing in drifting continents was close to scientific heresy. Serious people did not say it out loud. And now here was a woman, a drafter, a technician, pointing at her own hand-drawn map and suggesting the continents move. When she showed it to her research partner, Bruce Heezen, he did not celebrate. He groaned. He said it could not be, that it looked too much like continental drift. And he had a name for what she was doing. He called it girl talk. He told her to do it again, to recalculate, to redraft the whole thing, because she must have made a mistake. So she did, and the Rift Valley was still there. She checked and rechecked and drew it again, and it did not go away. Because it was real. For almost a year, the two of them were at a standoff. She saw the truth in her own lines. He refused to accept where they pointed. And then something changed everything. In another part of the same lab, a second assistant was working on a completely different map, a map of earthquakes, plotting the exact spot on the ocean floor where undersea earthquakes had struck one dot at a time. someone had the idea to lay the two maps on top of each other. Same scale, same ocean. One map showing Marie's Rift Valley, the other showing the earthquakes. They put them on a light table and lit them from below, and the dots fell into the crack. The earthquakes were happening inside her valley, exactly along the line she had drawn. The place where the floor was splitting was the place the earth was shaking. That was not a coincidence. That was a mechanism. The seabed really was pulling apart, and the tremors were the proof. Even Heathen could not argue with that. Slowly, the mockery stopped. The rift Marie had found turned out to run the entire length of the Atlantic. And then further, it wound around the whole planet, ocean after ocean, like the seam on a baseball. 40,000 miles of mountains, hidden under the water. The single largest geographic feature on Earth. And until Marie Tharp sat down and drew it, nobody even knew it was there. In 1957, the first map was published. When the findings were shown at Princeton, the head of the geology department told them they had shaken the foundations of geology. 2 years later, a skeptic dragged a camera across the Atlantic to prove the valley was not real, and instead filmed its cliffs, exactly where she said they would be. The thing everyone had called impossible was simply true, and within about a decade, it had a new name: plate tectonics. The idea that the surface of our planet is broken into moving pieces. The most important theory in all of the earth sciences. The thing every child now learns in school. And it rested, in large part, on the maps of a woman who had not been allowed on the boat. The story does not end perfectly. For years, her name was left off the major papers. She was described as merely a technician. The credit went to the men around her. She was finally allowed to go to sea only in the 1960s, long after the discovery was already made. It took until she was an old woman for the world to understand what she had done. But it did understand, in the end. The Library of Congress named her one of the greatest mapmakers of the entire 20th century. Her ocean floor hangs on the walls of classrooms all over the world. And every one of us now carries a picture in our heads. Continents that drift, a planet with a moving skin, a seabed full of mountains. We see the earth the way we do because one woman sat alone at a table in a room she was allowed into, mapping a sea she was not, and trusted her own hand over every man who told her she was wrong. They called it girl talk. It was the shape of the world.